In today's episode of Today in World War II, December 23rd, uh, a British man becomes Lord Haw Haw. A German submarine sank a British ship in the Mediterranean that unfortunately killed about 700 of their comrades. The Japanese finally finish off Wake Island, and a new American heavy tank was first seen in combat. I would say much too little, much too late. Let's get started. Okay, so on December 23rd, 1940, the Germans were continuing to bomb the city of Manchester. They had been bombing for two straight nights. Uh, they sent the bulk of their bombers at night, of course, because they had utterly failed in daylight bombing against the RAF during the Battle of Britain. What was interesting about this was that they bombed the British every day during the Blitz, or every night, I should say. That's not why I'm bringing this up. What's noteworthy for me is that this is where a British man named William Joyce, he had started making propaganda radio broadcasts for the Germans. He spoke in a very upper class, posh, tough accent. And he was given the name by, in Great Britain, Lord Haw Haw. Not really sure the etymology of that word, but he would go on the radio and taunt the British. Much like you had Tokyo Rose, who was a American citizen who was forced to, well, she claims she was forced to broadcast, anti-American things to demoralize the American troops. Actually, they kind of liked her music, so they put up with her negativity, quote unquote. But in this case, the Brits didn't let themselves get down by that, but they despised the guy, and he eventually was, captured by the Brits after the end of the war. But I just thought that was interesting. They had a woman who also broadcast. Her name was Axis Sally. They had different people that were broadcasting, but I think Lord Haw Haw had the most notoriety throughout the war. So while the raids against Manchester were bad, they dropped 195 tons of bombs. They killed about 363 civilians, wounded about 1,100 of them. But apologies for seeming to not care about that. I just wanted to talk about Lord Haw Haw and his role in the propaganda war, in World War II. On December 23rd, 1941, the British submarine, or excuse me, I'm sorry, the German submarine U-559 sank a British passenger ship called the Shuntian off of Tobruk, Libya. Ironically, this was, and again, the U-boat commander had no idea. The submarine commanders never knew, what was inside unless the ship was clearly marked. There's no indication that the British had marked that there were POWs on the ship, but there were. There was about 700 prisoners, excuse me, there was a total about 700 passengers. Most of them were Axis prisoners of war, German and Italian soldiers. They were being um, evacuated to Great Britain, where they'd be held prisoner and probably eventually sent to Canada, which is where what was the destination for most of the POWs in that whole chain of, because England was too small to house all those POWs. And remember, as it got a little bit later in the war, they were taking hundreds of thousands of prisoners. So anyway, they did about 400 POWs were rescued by a British corvette, the HMS Salvia, and the destroyer HMS Hythrop. So at least there wasn't a catastrophic loss of life for these prisoners, but it was a heavy casualty day for German prisoners, German Italian prisoners, in the Sea War that was fierce at this time, because this is when the battle in the North African campaign was at its hottest. So I would hope and pray that you would like my video. All you have to do is just go down below the screen. There's a thumbs up and a thumbs down. Just click the thumbs up and leave a comment, and you will go a long ways towards helping me grow my channel, which I appreciate. Thank you very much. And on December 23rd, 1941, well, before I get into that, I had mentioned in a couple of days ago in a previous episode that two Japanese aircraft carriers were on their way back from the Pearl Harbor attack, and they were diverted along with a couple of heavy cruisers to Wake Island because the Marines there had repulsed the first invasion attempt, and the Marines had a couple of 3-inch cannons. They at the time they had like five working F-4F Wildcat fighters that they had converted into dive bombers, and they had sunk a destroyer, and they were doing a lot of damage. Well, I mentioned that the carriers had gathered a strike force, and they had pretty much shot down all of the remaining American fighters. And now today, they actually invaded. They invaded the Japanese Special Second Naval Landing Force landed on Wake Island and Wilk Island in the Atoll, and they overwhelmed the Marines and the commander of Wake Island. He surrendered the troops there, and but before that, the Marines did one final counterattack on Wilkes Island and actually killed 100 Japanese troops and only lost 11 Marines in that attack. But they couldn't, the numbers just weren't in their favor. And so, their commander ordered the surrender, and the Marines surrendered. And I will talk about this more in a later episode, but it did not end well for most of the Marines and the civilians that were there to be construction battalions. We're talking about being prisoners of the Japanese army, so in this case, the Navy, but it didn't really make that much difference. It was not going to end well for the American POWs. Finally, on December 23rd, 1944, the American Army introduced the M26 Pershing heavy tank, and they were deployed to forward U.S. Army units. I will take this opportunity to critique General Patton on this because when the before the war started, getting close to the war starting, Patton had played a key role in the United States Army developing and greenlighting production of American tanks. As you probably know, the main battle tank in the American arsenal for most of World War II was the Sherman tank. The Sherman tank was a medium tank. It was faster than a heavy tank, but it had a lot of flaws. It was lightly armored. It ran on a gasoline engine instead of diesel. Gasoline is much more flammable than diesel. The German tanks were all diesel. The Russian tanks were diesel for a reason. They didn't cook off as easily as the Shermans did with a gasoline engine. But I just think it was ironic that Patton was by far the most aggressive and best offensive general in the war, and he knew how to use tanks. And we saw that in after at the D-Day breakout when he was able to go hog wild and flank the army, the German army, who was still stuck in the hedgerows against the Bradley's army and the Canadians and the British near Caen. And it was fast, he was maneuverable, but it's ironic that he rejected the M26 Patton tank that was not given the priority. And when you consider how many American tank crews, and not just American, because we supplied the Sherman to the French, the Free French, who started fighting after Normandy. The Brits had some Shermans, so even the Russians got some Shermans and Lindleys. You know, hindsight being 2020, but that was a very poor decision on Patton's part. The priority should have been the M26 because that was a heavy tank that could go toe to toe with a Tiger and a Panther, and it would have saved a lot of tankers' lives in the war. What are you going to do, right? I mean, people don't have crystal balls, but I just find that ironic that Patton was the guy who knew how to use tanks best, and he chose the wrong tank. Well, I'm glad you didn't choose somebody else's video. I'm glad you watched this one. So thank you very much for watching. I appreciate it, and I'll see you tomorrow.